And then things are happening.
I would have been friends with Stalin.
You're goddamn right I would have been friends with Stalin. And today we're reading, of course, continuing on with the collected works of the comrade Stalin. We're on the PDF page number 201, or if you're on the physical copy, 180, on the work concerning the agrarian question. So last time we read a larger body of work which was about the agrarian question, or it was called the agrarian question. This one is concerning the agrarian question, so sort of continuing on with what we read last time. So strap in, get those thinking caps on. Let's quit Stalin and read some Stalin. Concerning the agrarian question. You probably remember the last article on municipalization. See Elva, number 12. And Elva, the Lightning, was a daily Georgian newspaper. Organ of the United Tiflis Committee of the RSDLP, it began publication after the suppression of the Gazetia. The first number was issued on March 12th and the last on April 15th. 1906. On behalf of the Bolsheviks, the leading articles were written by J.V. Stalin. In all, 27 numbers were issued. Damn. Sign me up for the Elva, please. We have no wish to discuss all the questions the author touches upon. That is neither interesting nor necessary. We wish to touch upon only two main questions. Does municipalization contradict the abolition of the remnants of serfdom? And is the division of the land reactionary? This is exactly how our comrade presents the question. Evidently, he imagines that municipalization, division of the land, and similar questions are questions of principle. The party, however, puts the agrarian question on an altogether different basis. The point is that social democracy regards neither nationalization nor municipalization, nor the division of the land as questions of principle, and raises no obligation on principle to any of them. Read Marx's manifesto, Kautsky's The Agrarian Question, Minutes of the Second Congress, and The Agrarian Question in Russia, also by Kautsky. And you will see that this is precisely the case. Remember, we have to pretend to like Kautsky right now. The party regards all these questions from the practical point of view and puts the agrarian question on a practical basis. What most fully carries out our principle, municipalization, nationalization, or division of the land. This is the basis on which the party puts the question. It goes without saying that the principle of the agrarian program, the abolition of the remnants of serfdom, and the free development of the class struggle remains unchanged. Only the means of carrying out this principle have changed. This is how the author should have presented the question. Namely, which is the better means of securing the abolition of the remnants of serfdom and the development of the class struggle? municipalization, or the division of land. He, however, quite unexpectedly steps into the sphere of principles, palms off practical questions as questions of principle, and asks us, does so-called municipalization, quote, contradict the abolition of the remnants of serfdom and the development of capitalism? Unquote. Neither nationalization nor the division of land contradicts the abolition of the remnants of serfdom and the development of capitalism. But that does not mean that there is no difference between them. And the advocate of municipalization should at the same time advocate nationalization and the division of the land. Clearly, there is some practical difference between them. That is the whole point. And that is why the party puts the question on a practical basis. The author, however, as we noted above, carried the question to an entirely different plane, confused the principle with the means of carrying out this principle, and thus involuntarily evaded the question that is raised by the party. The author further assures us that the division of the land is reactionary, i.e., he hurls at us the same reproach that we have heard more than once from the socialist revolutionaries, those ultra-leftists we talked about last time. When those metaphysicians, the socialist revolutionaries, tell us that the division of the land is reactionary from the standpoint of Marxism, this reproach does not surprise us in the least. For we know perfectly well that they do not look at the question from the standpoint of dialectics. They refuse to understand that everything has its time and place, that something which may be reactionary tomorrow may be revolutionary today. But when dialectical materialists hurl that reproach at us, we cannot help asking, what then is the difference between dialecticians and metaphysicians? It goes without saying that the division of the land would be reactionary if it were directed against the development of capitalism. But if it is directed against the remnants of serfdom, if it is self-evident that the division of land is a revolutionary measure which social democracy must support. What is the division of the land directed against today? Against capitalism or against the remnants of serfdom? There can be no doubt that it is directed against the remnants of serfdom. Hence, the question settles itself. True. After the True. After capitalism has sufficiently established itself in the countryside, division of the land will become a reactionary measure, for it will then be directed against the development of capitalism. Then social democracy will not support it. At the present time, social democracy strongly champions the demand for a democratic republic as a revolutionary measure. But later on, when the dictatorship of the proletariat becomes a practical question, the democratic republic will already be reactionary, and social democracy will strive to destroy it. And that's where the naivete comes in that will be dispelled by the inter-imperialist war coming up. Stay tuned for that part. The same thing must be said about the division of the land. Division of the land, the petty bourgeois farming generally, is revolutionary when a struggle is being waged against the remnants of serfdom. But the same division of the land is reactionary when it is directed against the development of capitalism. Such is the dialectical view of social development. Karl Marx regards petty bourgeois farming in the same dialectical way when in volume 3 of Capital he calls it progressive compared with feudal economy. In addition to all this, Karl Kautsky says the following about the division of the land. The division of the land reserve, i.e., the large estates, which the Russian peasants are demanding and are already beginning to carry out in practice, is not only inevitable and necessary, but also highly beneficial, and social democracy has every ground for supporting this process. Unquote. See the Agrarian Question in Russia, page 11. Thank you, good Karl Kautsky. Later we'll meet bad Karl Kautsky, but that's a few years away. Again, inter-imperialist war period. We're still 1906. Of enormous importance for the settlement of a question is the correct method of presenting it. Every question must be presented dialectically, i.e., we must never forget that everything changes, that everything has its time and place, and consequently, we must always present questions in conformity with concrete circumstances. That is the first condition for the settlement of the agrarian question. Secondly, we must also not forget that today Russian Social Democrats put the agrarian question on a practical basis, and whoever wishes to settle that question must stand on that basis. That is the second condition for the settlement of the agrarian question. Our comrade, however, took neither of these conditions into consideration. Poor sweet summer comrade. Well then, the comrade will answer. Let us assume that the division of the land is revolutionary. Clearly, we shall strive to support this revolutionary movement. But that does not mean that we ought to introduce the demands of this movement into our program. Those demands are totally out of place in the program, etc. Evidently, the author is confusing the minimum program with the maximum program. Read them both, come on. He knows that the socialist program, i.e., the maximum program, should contain only proletarian demands. But he forgets that the democratic program, i.e., the minimum program, and the agrarian program in particular, is not a socialist program. And consequently, it will certainly contain bourgeois democratic demands which we support. Political freedom is a bourgeois demand, but despite that, it occupies an honorable place in our minimum program. But why go so far? Take clause 2 of the agrarian program and read. The party demands, quote, the abolition of all laws which restrict the peasant in the disposal of his land, unquote. Read all that and answer. What is socialistic about this clause? Nothing, you will say, because it demands freedom for bourgeois property and not its abolition. Nevertheless, this clause is in our minimum program. What is the point then? Only that the maximum program and the minimum program are two different concepts, which must not be confused. True, the anarchists will be displeased with that, but we cannot help it. We are not anarchists. As regards the peasants striving for the division of the land, we have already said that its importance is measured by the trend of economic development. And as this striving of the peasants springs directly from this trend, our party must support, not counteract it. Elva, the Lightning, number 14, March 29th, 1906. Signed J. Bezosishvili. Translated from Georgian. Thank you, Comrade Stalin. And we have another one to go along with this, you see. concerning the revision of the Agrarian program. And this was a speech delivered at the 7th sitting of the 4th Congress of the RSDLP. And we got a footnote here. The 4th Unity Congress of the RSDLP was held in Stockholm from April 10th to 25th, or rather April 23rd to May 8th in the new style. That's what we use now. Representatives were also present from the National Social Democratic parties of Poland and Lithuania, Latvia, and from the Bund. Many of the Bolshevik organizations were broken up by the government after the armed uprising in December 1905, and were therefore unable to send delegates. The Mensheviks had a majority at this Congress, although a small one. The predominance of the Mensheviks at the Congress determined the character of its decision on a number of questions. J.V. Stalin attended the Congress as a delegate from the Tiflis organization of the Bolsheviks under the pseudonym of Ivanchovich. He took part in the debates on the draft agrarian program, on the current situation, and on the State Duma. In addition, he made several statements of fact, in which he exposed the opportunist tactics of the Transcaucasian Mensheviks on the question of the State Duma, on the agreement with the Bund, and other questions. This is April 13th, 1906. So here we go. First of all, I will speak about the mode of argument adopted by certain comrades. Comrade Plekhanov talked a lot about Comrade Lenin's anarchistic propensities. Jesus. Plekhanov sounds very lost. About the fatal consequences of Leninism, and so on, and so forth. But he said very little about the agrarian question. And yet, he is down as one of the speakers on the agrarian question. I'm of the opinion that this mode of argument, which creates an atmosphere of irritation, in addition to being out of harmony with the character of our Congress, which is called a Unity Congress, tells us absolutely nothing about the presentation of the agrarian question. We could talk about Comrade Plekhanov's cadet propensities, but we would not, thereby carry the settlement of the agrarian question a single step forward. Further, John is the pseudonym of P.P. Maslov. Further, John, from certain data of the life of Guria, the Lettish region, etc., draws an inference in favor of municipalization for the whole of Russia. I must say that, speaking generally, that is not the way to draw up a program. In drawing up a program, we must take as the starting point not the specific features of certain parts of certain border regions, but the features common to the majority of localities in Russia. A program without a dominating line is not a program, but a mechanical combination of different propositions. That is exactly how it stands with John's draft. Moreover, John is quoting incorrect data. In his opinion, the very process of development of the peasant movement speaks in favor of his draft, because in Guria, for example, in the very process of this movement, a regional local government body was formed, which took control of the forests, etc. But first of all, Guria is not a region, but one of the usages of the Kudis Guberina. Secondly, there has never been in Guria a revolutionary local government body covering the whole of Guria. There have been only small local government bodies, which are not the same thing as a regional local government body. Thirdly, control is one thing, ownership is quite another. Speaking generally, Lots of legends are afloat concerning Guria, and the Russian comrades are quite mistaken in taking them for the truth. In regards to the essence of the subject, I must say that the following proposition should serve as the starting point for our program. Since we are concluding a temporary revolutionary alliance with the militant peasantry, and therefore, since we cannot ignore the demands of this peasantry, we must support these demands if, on the whole, they do not run counter to the trend of economic development and the course of the revolution. The peasants are demanding division. Division does not run counter to the phenomena I have mentioned. Hence, we must support complete confiscation and division. From this point of view, both nationalization and municipalization are equally unacceptable. By advancing the slogan of municipalization or of nationalization, we gain nothing and make the alliance between the revolutionary peasantry and the proletariat impossible. Those who say that division is reactionary confuse two stages of development, the capitalist and the pre-capitalist stages. Undoubtedly, in the capitalist stage, division is reactionary. But under pre-capitalist conditions, under the current conditions prevailing in the Russian countryside, for example, division, on the whole, is revolutionary. Of course, forests, waters, etc. cannot be divided, but these can be nationalized, and that does not run counter to the revolutionary demands put forward by the peasants. Furthermore, the slogan, revolutionary committees, which John proposes, instead of revolutionary peasant committees, fundamentally contradicts the spirit of the Agrarian Revolution. The object of the Agrarian Revolution is primarily and mainly to emancipate the peasants. Consequently, the slogan, Peasants' Committees, is the only slogan that corresponds to the spirit of the Agrarian Revolution. If the emancipation of the proletariat must be the act of the proletariat itself, then the emancipation of the peasants must be the act of the peasants themselves. Minutes of the Unity Congress of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party held in Stockholm in 1906, and this particular version is published Moscow 1907, pages 59 and 60. Hell yeah. Alright, so yeah, we're gonna also do On the Present Situation, a speech delivered at the 15th sitting of the 4th Congress of the RSDLP, April 17th, actually 30th in our calendar today, 1906. It is no secret to anyone that two paths are now discernible in the development of the social and political life of Russia. The path of pseudo-reform and the path of revolution. It is clear also that the big factory owners and the landlords, headed by the Tsarist government, are taking the first path, while the revolutionary peasantry and the petty bourgeoisie, headed by the proletariat, are taking the second. The crisis that is developing in the towns and the famine in the countryside are making another upheaval inevitable. Consequently, here, facilitation is impermissible. I want you to take note of something he's talking about here, stressing about here. Something, by the way, that plagued Russia for many, many, many decades, for centuries. Cyclical famines, mostly due to, of course, the way that property and agriculture was divided and the technology of it. But primarily because it was divided into like this semi-feudal arrangement and then into a semi-capitalist arrangement briefly. And the collectivization of agriculture is the thing that finally ended that cycle of famines, which made the so-called Holodomor, which is not a real fucking thing. There was a real famine, but the Holodomor is not a real thing. But it made the famine that happened then just about the very last one ever. So, contrary to part of the narrative that the quote-unquote Holodomor was caused by collectivization of agriculture, quite the contrary. Collectivization of agriculture guaranteed that it was one of the very last. Apart from one that was caused primarily also by the war following that and the devastation of arable land. Anyway, I will continue. Either the revolution is on the upgrade, and in that case, we must carry the revolution through to the end, or it is on the downgrade, in which case we cannot and should not set ourselves such a task. Rudenko is wrong in thinking that this method of presenting the question is not dialectical. Rudenko is looking for a middle course. He wants to say that the revolution is and is not on the upgrade, and that it should and should not be carried to the end, because, in his opinion, dialectics makes it incumbent to present this question in his way. That is not our conception of Marxian dialectics. And so, we are on the eve of another upheaval. The revolution is on the upgrade, and we must carry it to the end. On this we are all agreed. But under what circumstances can we, and should we, do this? Under the hegemony of the proletariat, or under the hegemony of bourgeois democracy? This is where our main disagreements begin. Comrade Martinov has said already in his Two Dictatorships that the hegemony of the proletariat and the present bourgeois revolution is a harmful utopia. The same idea ran through the speech he delivered yesterday. The comrades who applauded him evidently agree with him. If that is the case, if, in the opinion of the Menshevik comrades, what we need is not the hegemony of the proletariat, but the hegemony of the democratic bourgeoisie, then it is self-evident that we should take no direct active part either in the organization of an armed uprising or in the seizure of power. Such is the scheme of the Mensheviks. On the other hand, if the class interests of the proletariat lead to its hegemony, if the proletariat must be at the head of the present revolution and not drag at its tail, it goes without saying that the proletariat cannot refrain either from taking an active part in the organization of an armed uprising, or from seizing power. Such is the scheme of the Bolsheviks. Either the hegemony of the proletariat or the hegemony of the democratic bourgeoisie. That is how the question stands in the party. That is where we differ. Minutes of the Unity Congress of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party held in Stockholm in 1906, and published again Moscow 1907, page 187. 187, yep. I said it right. I don't know why I repeated it 3 times. There you go. Stalin.